Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Nuclear Energy Institute's annual briefing to the financial community. I'm Monica Trauzy, Senior Director of External Communications here at NEI, and we're coming to you live from NEI's headquarters in Washington, D.C. And in a moment, we'll be joined by NEI President and CEO Maria Korsnick for her annual State of the Industry address. We've taken a bit of a different approach this year. We're streaming to you via Facebook and YouTube, which will give you, our viewers, the opportunity to interact with us in real time and ask Maria questions. Following her remarks, Maria and I will sit and take your questions, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please submit your questions via the comment section on Facebook or by emailing us at annualbriefing@nei.org. And now, please allow me to introduce Nuclear Energy Institute President and CEO Maria Korsnick. Good morning, Maria.
Thank you, Monica, and thank all of you for joining us today. Each day we hear news about nuclear energy from Akron to Trenton to Riyadh. The prominence of these events, what makes them noteworthy, is a reflection of how nuclear energy is central to so many of the issues that we care about: jobs, health, national security, the climate. Nuclear energy matters because we care about the big ideas that define our way of life and enable human health, safety, comfort, and prosperity around the world. The future of nuclear energy will be shaped by the choices being made by the White House and Congress, by individual companies, by state legislatures and governors, and by federal agencies. And to be clear, there are choices to be made. They will also come from entrepreneurs, students, and concerned citizens who have become grassroots advocates. Let's also be clear about one more thing. If we fail to act, we have still, in fact, made a choice. The market is forcing us to make fundamental choices. Do we want to preserve a diverse electric system? Do we want to be prepared when fossil fuel prices change again? When weather extremes create competing demands for natural gas or freeze the coal piles? Do we want to hold on to clean air? Do we want to sustain the industrial base and talent base that is linked to our national security? We didn't have to stress these virtues 10 years ago, but in today's market, we do. Nuclear energy produces no air emissions. It does that in a lot of places where zero-emission energy is essential because the downwind air quality is already bad. We operate with months or years of fuel already on site, so we are invulnerable to problems with pipelines or barges or railroads. We run well in cold weather and hot weather, and we either ride through the hurricanes or we're ready as soon as the grid gets restarted. So we're here to talk about why we are important, vital in fact, to maintaining the resiliency of our electric system. Electricity is at the heart of our economy, our health, and our comfort. We're passionate about preserving our industry, which produces almost 20% of our electricity and more than 56% of our carbon-free power. I want to tell you what we're doing to meet these challenges. Part of our response is to help inform the choices that are being made. We've sought to step back from the daily news cycle and try to provide a framework for understanding these decisions. We call it the National Nuclear Energy Strategy. The strategy has 4 priorities. First, to preserve the operating nuclear fleet that we have today. We do that by working to ensure that the attributes of nuclear power are properly valued so that no well-run plant is driven into early retirement. Second, we must sustain the efficient operation of the nuclear facilities, and this means ensuring that we're running our plants as efficiently as we can while applying regulations that are appropriate for the risks that we face. Third, we must innovate by developing and deploying advanced technologies that expand the ways that we use nuclear energy. And fourth, the U.S. nuclear industry needs a level playing field to thrive internationally. Let me use these strategic priorities to frame the choices that will matter. As we think about preserving the nuclear fleet, now 99 reactors, the choice before us is how we should value the benefits that nuclear energy provides. Nuclear plants that operate in competitive wholesale markets are obviously under significant economic stress. From the 6 reactors that closed in the last 5 years, we're losing 38 million megawatt hours of emission-free electricity each and every year. Plant owners have announced their intention to close 12 more in the coming years. If nothing is done to save those plants, the impacts will be devastating. Thousands of jobs will be lost across the country. Our electricity grid will lose the diversity that has allowed it to withstand hurricanes and floods, extreme temperatures, and other challenges. And we'll lose a lot of non-emitting electricity. If all of these 12 plants close, we will lose over 120 million megawatt hours of carbon-free generation. That's equal to half of all the megawatt hours of wind electricity generated last year in the entire United States. Ohio and Pennsylvania face a choice right now. First Energy has announced that without policy changes, it will retire 2 reactors in Ohio and 2 more in Pennsylvania in 2020 and 2021. We can stick with a myopic focus on short-term prices, or we can strive to preserve a resilient, robust electricity system, jobs, tax revenue, clean air, and healthy communities. A report by the Brattle Group is being released on Monday, and it will sum up the threatened closures starkly. Keeping the 4 Ohio and Pennsylvania nuclear plants running would avoid more than 21 million metric tons of carbon emission annually, compared to making that same electricity with gas and coal. That's equivalent of 4.5 million cars. Losing these plants would more than reverse the emissions benefits of all the renewable generation in PJM installed over the past 25 years. Those installations cost billions of dollars. Policymakers have begun to take these risks seriously. Secretary Perry has sparked a much-needed conversation about the importance of having a resilient grid, and FERC has embarked on a deeper investigation of resilience. Here's the issue. If our markets force nuclear plants to close, we'll create risks that we've just not thoroughly thought through. ISO New England has looked into it and what its future might be like without the nuclear plants that it has, and it sees a reason for alarm. New England's electricity mix is now at 48% natural gas, up from 15% in 2000. As the grid looks out to the mid-2020s, it sees less coal and nuclear and still more reliance on natural gas. The challenge the planners face is that the region uses natural gas for heating. While they have the generation capacity to meet the need, the region hasn't added enough pipelines to also support electricity production. So in cold winter, they forecast that they will be unable to produce enough power except under the most optimistic of scenarios. And winters are going to be tougher in places served by the 12 reactors marked for premature retirement. In the cold weather last winter, even with these plants helping to provide power, electricity prices soared above $200 per megawatt hour in some areas as the fossil fuel prices spiked. Managing severe cold weather events without these nuclear plants will be costlier as the system will depend on less resilient sources of energy. Weather is a major challenge to the electric system. Hurricanes caused widespread devastation in 2017, and we expect intense storms in years to come. Already this year, we've had the bomb cyclone. Keeping the bulk power supply system intact and ready is crucial. You can't recover from a hurricane without electricity. You can't ride through a polar vortex or other extreme cold or heat without electricity. Irma and Harvey were unwelcome visitors last year, but even as roads in the Houston area became impassable, the South Texas nuclear plant continued to churn out electricity. Other services faltered, but not electricity. Nuclear plants keep a stock of generators, pumps, and other emergency equipment on site. They can keep themselves safe, but also they can continue churning out their product, electricity, for the safety of others. This is the type of asset that is now threatened. Are we making wise choices with our electric grid? Or are we allowing incremental changes that together introduces a level of risk nobody would knowingly accept? These are the questions that we need to be asking. We're seeing state governments take a lead to ask and answer these questions and increasingly make choices about how they will value nuclear energy. We have nuclear power plants in 30 states. 3 years ago, we saw only about maybe a dozen nuclear-related bills in the state houses. Last year, we saw more than 100 of them. And this year, we're on track for a very similar number. States recognize more and more that nuclear plants are vital to meeting environmental goals, driving local economies, and providing the energy security that they need. A handful of states are considering steps to preserve nuclear plants. Connecticut, for example, passed a law last fall that could allow their Millstone plant to participate in its clean energy procurement process. New Jersey has held hearings on legislation that would create zero-emission credit for electricity from nuclear plants. I testified in Trenton and Columbus about the need to preserve their nuclear plants. I was not alone. I was joined by environmentalists and labor leaders. It's clear to legislators in Trenton that if the goal is to avoid emissions, then preserving existing reactors is a very cost-effective way to do it. And doing so will also preserve valuable capacity and reliability. The legislature there could vote later today. Pennsylvania lawmakers have established the first ever bicameral, bipartisan nuclear energy caucus, and a member of Maryland's House of Delegates just formed such a group. Ohio has considered a zero-emission nuclear credit bill. The Minnesota legislature has advanced a bill out of committee that would create a stable environment for a capital investment at its nuclear facilities. These states are following the leads provided by New York and Illinois, which acted to save plants. These policies were challenged in U.S. District Court, although in each instance the case was dismissed. In reviewing the New York policy, the judge could not see how state programs to support renewable deployments were meaningfully different than the programs to preserve nuclear plants for their non-emitting attribute. Each case is now being heard by the U.S. Court of Appeals. The pursuit of clean energy can threaten our nuclear plants if we don't do it thoughtfully. If the goal is to reduce emission, then all zero-emission technologies must be part of the solution. We must recognize what we already have in place and build on that. Replacing zero-emitting technology with other zero-emitting technology doesn't make progress. Arizona is facing a clear choice about how a state should use nuclear energy in meeting its environmental goals. One of the proposals under consideration would include nuclear. The other sets a less ambitious goal while excluding nuclear. The first one will get more done and get there faster because of the Palo Verde nuclear generating station. It is America's largest single source of non-emitting electricity. It provides 30% of the state's total electricity, and it should be allowed to contribute to this clean energy future. A policy that advances renewables while closing nuclear plants won't solve any problems. This approach is like running in place. In fact, where the goal is to cut carbon dioxide emissions, we should be thinking in terms of zero emission standards, not sun and wind standards. Finally, we're seeing widespread attention on broader policies to address carbon emissions. New Jersey and Virginia are considering joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. New York is assessing whether its state program to support non-emitting generation could be met through market pricing. Others, such as Washington and Maryland, are exploring the possibility of carbon taxes. Policies targeted at reducing carbon will create incentives to use nuclear energy as part of a suite of technologies to reach these goals. So it's a varied landscape. The decision that will shape the future of nuclear energy are being made in the state capitals today. Our efforts to sustain the fleet are driving us towards smooth, efficient operation. Again, for the last 12 months, our operations have been exemplary. We have a 92% capacity factor for the U.S. fleet. and consistent production of more than 800 million megawatt hours a year. That means we're producing more electricity with the 99 reactors than ever before. In fact, it would have taken 140 reactors in the 1980s to produce as much electricity as our 99 reactors do today. Our generating costs have fallen for the last 5 years in a row. In 2017, our total generating cost was $33.61 per megawatt hour. Now that includes fuel, operations, and capital costs. It does not account for returns or risk management. The industry costs are down nearly 19% since their peak in 2012. Part of the drop is because of our continued search for efficiencies. We call it delivering the nuclear promise. This is an industry-wide effort to spread best practices among the operators. And we have so far identified 68 steps which create the potential for cutting costs by $1.3 billion across the industry. Part of our expense structure is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Our industry pays about 90% of the NRC's budget. As the industry faces changes, so in fact does the NRC, and we remain interested in an efficient regulatory framework that governs the current plants as well as future reactors. The NRC leadership is actively looking for input on how to improve its operations. We've suggested stricter adherence to a principle that we all agree to in theory, risk-informed regulation, which means focusing on what matters and what is most important to safety. We have also repeatedly called for embracing the best available new technology, including digital technology where appropriate. Digital technology can help us improve safety and trim unnecessary costs. And our reactors are durable. By the end of this year, we expect the owners of 6 of them will have applied for permission to extend their lives to 80 years. We see a very substantial bipartisan coalition that supports follow-through on the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. That means 2 things: relatively small appropriations that will allow the NRC to resume its hearings on whether to grant a license for the Yucca Mountain repository, and support for an interim storage site. The Trump administration has asked for $150 million to support the NRC and the DOE. 80 members of the House signed a letter requesting that this be made a top priority in the 2019 budget. Last year, the House Energy and Commerce Committee approved a bill to advance the Yucca Mountain repository. The bill also would authorize consolidated interim storage of used fuel, and there are locations in both New Mexico and Texas that have expressed interest in hosting such a site. Given the legislation's current momentum and strong vote of 49-4 within the committee, we anticipate the bill will be brought to the House floor, and hoping in the next coming weeks, and will pass with overwhelming bipartisan support. In the Senate, we could also see bipartisan used fuel legislation introduced in the near future. We look forward to working with both bodies of Congress to, once and for all, address the issue of nuclear waste in a comprehensive manner. The hurdles to solving used fuel are political, not technical, and we hope to move the ball forward as we go through later this year. And we continue to innovate. In March, Southern Company's Plant Hatch started up with some test quantities of 2 kinds of accident-tolerant fuel. There are 4 companies developing such fuel, each with its own approach. The new fuel are designed to withstand hotter temperatures without damage. Some of the designs would also allow for greater heat production, meaning that existing reactors could produce more electricity. I also want to tell you about the new reactors that are coming. They're being helped along by what Congress did in February. It removed the deadline for qualifying for a production tax credit and widened the scope of who can use it. Extension of the production tax credit was an important component of the decision by Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission to proceed with the Vogtle project near Augusta, Georgia. After those 2 reactors, there will be production tax credits available now for another 3,800 megawatts of new reactors. One obvious candidate is the small modular reactor project being developed by UAMPS. UAMPS wants a NuScale plant and already has a site at the Idaho National Laboratory. NuScale's design certification is progressing well through the NRC. We also see a variety of players aiming for a new product category that might be best called microreactors. That would compete with the dirtiest and most expensive form of fossil generation, diesel fuel. There's strong interest in these reactors for remote, off-grid locations, including military bases. There continues to be a great deal of interest in new reactor designs that take advantage of different fuels or coolants. They're meant to mesh well with intermittent renewables and to provide higher quality heat. Developing advanced reactors is about more than just the price of electricity. We'll also need to market the value that all nuclear delivers, and we'll need good management and planning by the regulators. And we hear encouraging things from the NRC. At its annual public conference in March, the Commission Chair, Kristine Svinicki, said her agency would develop new processes to review and approve reactors other than the familiar light water models. And a thriving American nuclear industry is about more than just reactors in the United States. We're encouraged by the vigor with which the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is pursuing nuclear power. The kingdom has a growing demand for electricity, and it will continue to grow. The Saudis don't want to burn oil for electricity because they want to continue to export it. Given the continued electrification of Saudi society, the clear solution is nuclear power, a route already embraced by Saudi's neighbor in the United Arab Emirates. The Saudis' plans to procure both new large nuclear reactors as well as smaller advanced designs. There's an international competition to supply technology and expertise to Saudi Arabia. We thank the administration for helping keep the U.S. in the running as it opens up the opportunity for the United States, rather than Russia or China, to form a century-long relationship. Another growing segment of the international market is the United Kingdom, which has limited supplies of natural gas and a national commitment to reduce emissions of carbon. The UK is looking at multiple designs from U.S. vendors for both large and smaller applications. These include General Electric, NuScale, and Westinghouse. AP1000 reactor is one of 4 designs under consideration for large reactors. The Chinese and the French also are competing in this market. The export market is growing, and our success there will strengthen the U.S. supply chain and its support of the existing U.S. fleet. So where does all of this leave us? We need a healthy domestic nuclear industry to keep the lights on, to keep air pollution in check, to keep thousands of people in good-paying year-round jobs, to keep municipal budgets funded, to keep our expertise base that helps us with exports in a global market. And in places that have carbon emission goals, nuclear is essential to meeting them. But most of all, we need to recognize what we have and not let it slip away through incremental decisions or careless decisions that take us in directions that we're going to regret later on. We need to make choices that will sustain the fleet, help us innovate, and thrive. We're an essential component of a clean, diverse, resilient grid. Our challenge is to spread that message in the state capitals, among the grid operators, to the lawmakers here in Washington, and to the country as a whole. We can make the right choices that will benefit all of us here and around the world. Thank you very much.
For those insightful remarks, I want to remind our audience that we're taking questions via Facebook Live in the comments section, as well as via email at annualbriefing@nei.org. And we're really going to try to get to as many questions as we can this morning. Maria, that was wonderful. Thank you. So much happening in the industry, and you've just wrapped your first year as CEO of NEI. It's been a significant year for the industry. A lot has happened. What has stood out to you the most, and what excites you the most about what's next for the industry?
Thanks, Monica. It has been an exciting year. For one thing, I've had an opportunity to really get around in the industry. I've had an opportunity to visit the national labs, see all the exciting new technology that they're working on, and also to visit many of the states that I talked about and testify and have an understanding of how important that these power plants really mean to each one of the states and the local communities. So on one hand, it's been an opportunity to really touch base with all of the new that's coming in, and also to understand the level of stress. And the level of stress is significant for our plants in the merchant market.
And plant closures are something that we're following very closely here. You spoke about how they could have significant negative impacts on health, on the environment, on the economy. What concerns you the most about plants closing?
Well, it's hard to watch us make strategic decisions in a tactical manner. So just worrying about, a price of today to shut down an asset that has decades more to offer. And its offer to clean air, offer to the environment, to the local communities. And that's really why our passion is to get that message out, to say let's not make a short-term decision and have a strategic regret. These plants are connected to the local communities. I know, I was a site vice president that ran a plant in New York, and I know how integrated that they are, how much they support the local community, the school systems, the hospitals. They're the local infrastructure, really, of the towns that they operate near. And they've been doing so for many, many years. In some cases, maybe taken for granted. And so this conversation, I think, has really caused people to step back and take notice.
We've been able to work together over the last 6 months on the Millennial Nuclear Caucuses that NEI has been co-sponsoring with the Department of Energy. Why is that segment, millennials, so important for us to be tapping into right now? And as you've attended these caucuses, what have you noticed about the conversations that are happening among millennials on nuclear?
Yeah, the Millennial Caucuses, I think, are really exciting, Monica. The energy, the interest, the engagement of the millennials around this technology is inspiring. And let's face it, they're going to carry this football forward. They're going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and to see them passionate about nuclear energy and to appreciate the significance of what nuclear is bringing is heartwarming. And the fact that they can appreciate the technology that we have today, and also the interest and engagement of those new advanced reactors, the micro reactors I just talked about. We think about nuclear today as these sort of large plants that maybe live in a community near you, but those reactors in the future, ranging from, say, a megawatt to 20 megawatts even, now you have applications for nuclear that are going to be in areas where distributed generation is. Maybe it could power a building, power a hospital, power a local community. So I think nuclear is going to be more engaged in the local level, and I think the millennials appreciate and get that.
Earlier this year, NextEra and Entergy announced that they would be leaving NEI. Do you expect more companies will leave NEI over the next few years?
Yeah, so that's interesting that you bring that up. We did have two significant companies choose not to renew their membership in NEI. And although we're saddened by that, we continue very much to be the voice of the nuclear industry. I think it's a sign, quite frankly, of the stress that the industry is under. And we take our job very, very seriously to be that voice of the industry. A voice such as ours is so critical right now with all of the attention at the state levels, quite frankly, that's being given. And we embrace that mission very strongly.
So we have lots of questions coming in from the audience. Do you think that nuclear is linked to coal in policymaking, especially at the federal level? And is that something that you'd like to see changed?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There's things about nuclear and coal that are similar in terms of the reliability and resilience that we offer the grid. There's things that nuclear looks like solar and wind, in terms of emission-free and carbon-free generation. So nuclear has sort of a little bit of the attributes, if you will, of several of the generation types. And so that's really the uniqueness, if you will, of nuclear, that we have that base load resilience with that environmental friendliness.
When do you anticipate advanced fuels will become available?
Well, the advanced fuels that I mentioned, as we talked about, we already have one in a trial basis in a reactor operating now. And so, over the next, say 5 years, there'll be the opportunity for us to have more designs and more things learned and work through the licensing process. So part of that depends on the regulatory footprint, but from a technology perspective, I would say over the next 5 years or so, we're going to see a lot of progress there.
And then what would the economic impacts be on the reactors, the existing reactors that would be using the fuels?
It's a case-by-case basis in terms of the specific impact to the plant. The cost of the fuel might be a little bit more expensive, but there might be benefits that get offset by that. So it's going to be a plant-by-plant decision.
What policies do you want states to pursue to preserve nuclear plants?
Well, as we talked about, in really acknowledging the attributes that nuclear brings to the equation, look at the conversations that are playing out in the states today on the zero emission credits. I mean, the fact that you're bringing the volume of electricity that you're bringing, and nuclear is a workhorse from a production perspective, and you're getting that volume without any impact to the environment. No emissions, no carbon, and that recognition needs to be evaluated and brought into the marketplace.
First Energy made some news just about 2 weeks ago. What is NEI's stance on First Energy's request for a 202C emergency declaration?
So the 202C emergency declaration, we look as a bridging strategy. I mean, ultimately the fix that's needed is that recognition in the marketplace. That recognition has been a bit slow in coming, which is why you're seeing the level of activity that you're seeing at the state level. FERC has been working on price formation type of work. So ultimately, the long-term answer is going to be one that's market-driven, and I see this 202C much more of a bridging strategy that we want to keep the plants engaged and involved while the longer-term strategy is developed.
You mentioned NuScale in your remarks. Are they making progress with design certification?
They are. They submitted a bit over a year ago, and they are making significant progress through the regulatory. One example, that will get benefits as plants like NuScale go through the licensing process is there's unique things that get evaluated. In the particular case for NuScale, they evaluated their need for emergency electricity supply. And so based on their design, the NRC said there wasn't a requirement for a certain class, if you will, of emergency power. So that's very interesting because now that's setting the groundwork and that's setting the regulatory framework for some of these designs that I talked about that will be coming forward in the next several years. So getting these kinds of decisions on a plant like NuScale is not only beneficial to NuScale, but it's strategically significant because it's laying very important groundwork for other reactor designs.
We've been hearing a lot about regulatory transformation at the NRC lately. What role does regulatory transformation play in ensuring there is a viable future for nuclear? Why is it important?
So their NRC is embarking, they just had a recent annual conference and they talked about an initiative called Transformation. And so we're obviously very interested in that. On behalf of the industry, we submitted comments to the NRC in terms of ideas for the Transforming initiative. But at the heart of it, we need the regulator to be able to assess risk-informed regulation. In other words, not from a cookbook, if this, do that, but understand the significance of a regulation and let's apply it for the most safety benefit that's needed. And we have had conversations with the NRC in the past, and It's been a difficult sort of culture for them to embrace, but I hope through this transformation initiative that it is something very much that they are embracing. And it also, and through their transformation initiative, will lay groundwork for them to embrace the new technologies and regulation for the new plants that are going to come down the line.
Let's talk about international news for a moment. You talked about the building of reactors in Saudi Arabia. How well is the U.S. doing in competing with Russia and China when it comes to building globally?
Yeah, so in that case, we very much want to be engaged in the global market, and we talked a bit about the fact that we want to be in the running, so to speak, with the Saudi Arabia build. But the stark reality, if you step back and look at who is building or who has opportunities to build, China and Russia have been very aggressive. And they see very much the opportunity around the world to build their design. So there's about 58 reactors being built today, and 2/3 of those are Chinese and Russian design. So they have both made a very strong commitment. The challenge we have is from a United States perspective. I talked about our performance earlier. We've had greater than a 90% capacity factor in the United States for greater than 15 years. We operate nuclear plants really, really well. And we want to ensure that those safety standards and those methods are in fact explored around the world. So we need to be in the conversation and be in the process as these plants are being built around the world. Also, when you build commercial nuclear, it begs the question about putting in the right non-proliferation standards. So if we have a seat at the table, we make sure that there's a non-proliferation discussion. If we're not at the table, then those conversations are governed by others. So it's very, very important that the United States stays engaged in the worldwide conversation relative to commercial nuclear.
Decommissioning. It's going to be important as plants are retired. What's happening in this part of the industry?
So absolutely, decommissioning is something that over the last several years, essentially there's been a bit of a one-off as plants begin the decommissioning process. There's separate approvals that they need to get along the way. We've been working with the industry to try to put better regulation, if you will, around that, so that instead of going by exception and having to get some things approved, that it would be a smoother process. That process is underway through rulemaking within the NRC today. So as plants close, there'll be a more smooth transition from an operating reactor to a decommissioned reactor. But of course, ultimately through decommissioning, we have to figure out where to put that used fuel. And that's why I talked earlier about the importance of getting used fuel legislation passed so that we have the opportunity, once these plants are decommissioned, to return the use of that land to other uses if the area so chooses.
You talked about so much of the action happening on the state level and that you've testified in several instances in states where there is legislation moving that would impact nuclear. What messages have resonated the most when you're on the ground in these states? And what are some of the takeaways that you've walked away with coming back to Washington and sort of delivering the messages that you hear in those states?
Yeah, well, the state conversations have really sort of colored and provided a lot of heartfelt testimony for the fact that these plants are such an integral part of the local community. The tax base that are helping run the school systems, the local hospitals, the local infrastructure. It takes it from an impersonal, there's a power plant, to the personal. The power plant is run by people, and the people care, and the people matter. Having been in the industry for over 30 years, I appreciate and understand how closely linked these power plants are to the local folks. And as I said, when I'm out there, you know, I'm not alone. More and more we're getting the environmentalists to appreciate and understand the message and testify as well. And labor leaders, labor has been very, very supportive. They've worked at these plants for decades, and they appreciate the good paying jobs that they provide, and they appreciate the resilient electricity that the plants produce.
Let's go back to used fuel. Do you think meaningful progress will be made on used fuel this year?
All right, now I don't want to jinx it, but I do actually think we're going to get progress on used fuel this year. I'm excited to see the conversations that have occurred already on the House. We talked about the vote 49-4, getting it out of committee, really shows strong bipartisan support. And we do anticipate over the next several weeks that that will then be brought to the House floor. And likewise on the Senate side, I think once we get something through the House, it puts some attention on the Senate side to likewise push some bipartisan legislation, and we have some proponents there ready to do that. So really by the end of this year, we could actually see those bills conferenced and real durable legislation on used fuel occur in the United States. And it's fabulous. Just to remind everybody, the fuel is very safe where it's at. It's safely stored. It's not that issue. It's just that we were promised that at the end of the day when we built these plants that there would be a place for the used fuel, and we need to in fact have these long-term repositories established so that there's an appreciation that the fuel is stored in a durable fashion and ready for that land to be used in other ways if people want it.
Great. Do you think a clean energy grid is really possible, one that does not include fossil fuels, one that's made up of nuclear, wind, solar only?
Yeah, I would say I clearly see a clean energy future. I'm pretty passionate about that. I have two relatively young kids, and I think it's our responsibility to create an environment that can be healthy and sustainable for them into the future. And so I do think clean energy is very much a part of our future, and it's something that we need to be thoughtful about. With that said, I think we need to be smart about how we get there, and I really think it's an all-of-the-above strategy in terms of understanding the resilience that the grid needs and to be able to provide that resilience in a cost-effective way. And I think there's attributes of all the fuel sources that help contribute to that.
It's interesting, though, because many times the conversation becomes nuclear versus renewables instead of considering them sort of in the same light. How do you push back against that debate, the nuclear versus renewables?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be very much one of an embracing relationship between nuclear and renewables. Nuclear's that always there, 7/24, round the clock workhorse, if you will. And renewables are available when the wind's blowing, the sun's shining. So there's a natural partnership. I think it'll be even more of a natural partnership when we have some of the newer designs, whether those are small modular reactors or some of the micro reactors that we talked about. There'll be a lot more of a natural sort of load following capability for some of those designs. So I think that'll help even more, if you will, synthesize that relationship between renewables and nuclear. But at the heart of it, very much we are of the same purpose. We very much are kind to the environment, no emissions, and no carbon.
We spoke about millennials earlier. Let's talk about an even younger group. Do you think there should be more K-12 education on nuclear?
Oh, absolutely. I'm passionate about that. In fact, I think one of the things that's haunted nuclear a bit is that we don't talk about it in ways, how do you learn other things, right? You learn things as you went through school and you were exposed to things. We don't really have that sort of nuclear conversation to at least put that technology on par with other technology that they might be more familiar with and more aware. I'm personally, I see that again, as I mentioned, as my kids have gone through school, and I can see what they're taught, relative to nuclear power and nuclear energy. And so very interested, and in fact, we're working with the Department of Energy on an initiative to work and make sure that we have the right messages for nuclear built into the curriculum in K-12.
You mentioned state actions in lieu of market reforms. Is state-sponsored financial support necessary?
I think in some cases it is, just based on the, again, what I said, the state of the market today. But for example, you have cases, I think New Jersey is a good example, where the New Jersey legislature is looking at it and saying, okay, well, we'll pass this product, this package, But if there is a federal number, or if there is a market-driven number, then we're going to adjust, what this state package, looks like. And so I think it goes back to there's a bridging strategy that's needed right now, and that bridging strategy more and more is being offered more effectively and more efficiently at the state level. But if we get to a point, and maybe it's through price formation and maybe it's through other initiatives at FERC, that appropriately value the attributes that are being brought, then I think you need to take a look at what the state strategies have already been put in place.
And what action could we see from FERC to keep plants open?
Price formation is the one that we're looking at. I'd say it's been under discussion for the last several years. But just as one kind of example of the things that they're considering, and in PJM, for example, is the fact that nuclear doesn't set the price. Other plants set the price, and nuclear is what's called a price taker. And one of the examples that PJM was looking at would be to allow the nuclear plants to, in fact, set the price for electricity. And so that would be sort of a different way of looking at it, sort of changes the equation a bit. So it's those kinds of things that are under consideration that could be significant to the fleet.
Let's talk about some of the new reactor designs that are pretty exciting and interesting. They'll provide social benefits in addition to clean electricity, to health benefits, clean drinking water. What excites you the most about these advanced technologies?
Well, what I'm really excited about is it, again, takes nuclear out of just being that huge 1,500 megawatt plant, for example, and down into it can now play in different markets. If you have something that's somewhere between 1 megawatt and 20 megawatts, all of a sudden now it can play in different markets. Plus, you can link these together. So some of these small modular reactors, maybe they're 100 megawatts, 150 megawatts. You can just use that amount of power, or you can link a couple of them together and get that larger footprint if you want it. So what's exciting about that is now you have nuclear that can be tailored, if you will, to its use. And some of these places, let's pick some of the remote locations. Getting the fuel supply to wherever these remote locations are is very significant. You put one of these reactors there, they refuel every 10 or 15 years. Well, that's a game changer in terms of having to access and keep making, the fuel accessible. Same thing for, our troops that, work on our behalf in many of the remote locations in the world. They have to also have electricity, and they are sometimes put in harm's way trying to refuel generators. And so having something like this available to them, quite frankly, saves lives. And so really interested in sort of bringing not only the new technology, but it kind of opens the doors to how nuclear can be used and viewed. It's really exciting.
We have time for one final question, and I have to ask about Vogtle. As we know, Vogtle is really critical to Georgia's power, keeping the lights on in Georgia. How confident are you that Vogtle will be completed?
Well, I'm very confident that it'll be completed. Now, don't ask me when. But I know it's been on a bit of a challenge as it's, kind of worked through from beginning of construction to now. But Southern Company is now in charge of the construction management. They're very capable, very engaged, very involved. And I'm very confident that that plant will be finished. It's a wonderful design. As you know, it's being built in China as well. So very confident that the design will in fact be very robust, and it'll be exciting to see new nuclear here in the United States.
Maria, thank you so much for your time and for your insight this morning.
Great. Thanks, Monica.
And thank you for joining us. For more information, please visit NEI.org. That was great. Wonderful.